Thanks for joining us tonight. Thanks for being here for this Mountain States Bumble Bee Atlas training webinar, the first webinar of the season, which is very exciting. I appreciate your interest in this project, and I really appreciate you taking some time tonight to attend this training. My name is Amy Dolan. I'm a conservation biologist with the Xerces Society for Invertebrate Conservation, and I am your host this evening. So I'm going to start by sharing my screen, and we'll get started. So I'm joined this evening by my colleague Michelle, Michelle Toshak. She is the Montana Bumble Bee Atlas coordinator. She's joining us from Livingston, Montana. I'm joining us all from Grand Junction, Colorado. Michelle's going to be in the background tonight, just kind of keeping an eye on things, helping with the technical things. And yeah, awesome. Let's get started. The Xerces Society for Invertebrate Conservation, we are a science-based nonprofit organization working to conserve invertebrates in the habitats that support them. We do all sorts of really awesome and fun and important work. Michelle and I are both part of the Bumblebee team, which is awesome. We have a Western Monarch team, we have a freshwater mussel team, we have a firefly team, we have people that are specifically working on outreach and education. There's people working on habitat restoration, working with growers and farmers, working to research the effects of pesticides and lower the use of pesticides, and advocacy. So there's just a lot of great work that Xerces does, all to protect invertebrates, which is the life that sustains us. We are a donor-supported organization. If you are already a member of Xerces, we appreciate so much your support of our work. If you are not a member yet and would like to learn more, please check out xerces.org. There's a lot of resources available on our website, so you can learn more about what we do and then find out ways that you can help to support our work. Tonight is all about the Bumble Bee Atlas, though. So there's three big questions that we want to cover tonight. We want to talk about the what and the why of the Bumble Bee Atlas. This is really important because you as volunteers are really important. So I want to make sure that you understand why we're asking you to do this, why your contribution is so important. And also, Bumble Bee Atlas volunteers tend to be a little conspicuous out on the landscape. We walk around with nets and coolers and ice, and we're catching bumblebees and taking pictures of them. So people that see us tend to ask questions. And so I want you to understand what the Atlas is, why we're doing this, so that you have an answer ready to share with the general public when you're out doing this work. But then tonight, the majority of our time is going to be focused on the how. I want you to leave here tonight understanding your role as a volunteer with your questions answered and really excited for Bumblebee season, hopefully just as excited as I am. It's going to be a lot of information. So this webinar is getting recorded. It will get posted to the Xerces YouTube channel. It will also get posted to the Bumble Bee Atlas website on the Mountain States page so that you could go back and rewatch it. Because it is a lot of information, so don't feel like you have to remember everything tonight or furiously take notes. But we're going to give you a lot of information so you have it all here in one place and at one time. There are three websites that I want to make sure that you know about. The first one is the Bumble Bee Atlas website, bumblebeeatlas.org. This is our project website. There's tons of resources here. There's training videos, materials, printouts, all sorts of things that are there, including highlights from last season and highlights from other projects as well. I'm going to just take you there really quickly to make sure that you know how to navigate from this main landing page. This is the Bumble Bee Atlas main landing page. And this has information about all of our Atlas projects across the country. If you go to the top menu and you go to Get Involved, Find Your Atlas, then you can go to the Mountain States Bumble Bee Atlas, click there, and this has our regional specific resources. So tonight, there's going to be a lot of information that I share. Everything that I talk about is going to be someplace here on the website. I'll do my best of sharing where those things are, but this is a good place for you to know to go and look to find any questions, to find the answers to any questions that you may have. The second website I want to make sure that you know about is bumblebeewatch.org. This is our data website. This is where volunteers go to upload pictures that they take of bumblebees and the data from the survey data. This is also where you can look at the observations that other volunteers have submitted. You can look at their pictures, you can see maps of where different species have been found. So that is our data website. And the last website is the Xerces website. That's our organization website. There's information about all of our different programs. There's a blog and podcast. There's videos. There's pollinator plant lists. Just a ton of conservation resources. So that's a really good place to go if you're looking for background information to build your background knowledge. On the website, there is also this resource, the participant handbook that has been updated for the 2025 field season. Everything that we talk about tonight and then some is in this handbook. This is an in-depth resource that talks through why we do the atlas, how we do the atlas. You can find this on our website. It's a PDF that you can scroll through. It's good to know that this is available. It would be a good thing to review before heading out to do your first survey this season. And if questions come up throughout the season or you forget how to do something, this is another really good place to look. We try to have information in multiple places to make it really easy for you to find. We've also created this, what I call cheat sheet, this one-page summary of how to conduct a Bumblebee Atlas survey. So that way, if you're looking for just a quick outline of what are the key things to remember, this is a good resource to have. It's linked on our website as well. And again, just another resource to help you when you're getting ready to do your surveys. So let's dive in with the what. What is a Bumblebee Atlas? Bumblebee Atlas is a community science project that aims to find, photograph, and map native bumblebees while we're connecting with our neighbors across the region and helping to spread the word about the importance of bumblebees and other native pollinators and to increase awareness about issues surrounding them, conservation issues, and to encourage all of our neighbors and community members to take action to help them. The Mountain States Bumblebee Atlas covers the states of Colorado, Nevada, Utah, and Wyoming. And we started, this project launched last summer in 2024. So we finished one field season. We're looking ahead to our second field season coming up. The Mountain States Bumblebee Atlas is part of this large network of atlas projects across the US. Xerces Society had Bumblebee Atlas projects in 20 different states, so we're active in 20 different states and hoping to spread into some of those other places where we don't have an atlas yet. So when you join the Mountain States Bumblebee Atlas, you're joining this nationwide network of people who are passionate about helping pollinators and doing really important work and gathering information that is already being used for on-the-ground conservation action. You can see that we partner with all sorts of different agencies and organizations. So we have this really powerful network across the US to do this work that we're very excited about. Ultimately, our goal is to help bumblebees, to provide habitat for them, to prioritize conservation actions in order to help populations recover. But the Atlas project is doing that by data gathering. We need to have current information about where our bumblebee species are, the habitats that they're using, and the flowers that they're relying on. We're doing this on a large regional scale using a standardized protocol that's effort-based. That's a really important part of this, that every volunteer in all of these Atlas projects in 20 states all follow the same protocol. So we know the difference between when somebody goes out and spends 45 minutes looking for bumblebees and only finds one bee versus when they spend 45 minutes looking for bumblebees and find 30, or when they go and spend 45 minutes looking for a bumblebee and don't find any at all. It's that distinction is really important. We are recording the effort that it's taking and so that can be used in the long term as a baseline for population monitoring in the future. By doing this work, we're engaging citizens and agency partners all across the region to gather data on this really large regional scale. This work is powered by volunteers, and we could not do it without you. This project is not possible without volunteers. If I, or even just the team at Xerces, tried to gather the amount of data we're looking to gather through this project, it would take us years or decades. So we really rely on volunteers like you to be experts in your area, to know your local area, to know where to look for flowers, where to look for bumblebees, to know your landscapes, or to be willing to go out and explore them, and then to help us gather this information that we need. So you are our team. So we have our Atlas team, but you are our regional team. And it's really fun to know that we have people from all across the region. So this is a little audience participation time here. Michelle's going to turn the chat on. She's going to activate the chat. And it would be awesome if you don't mind to just type in the chat. Are you planning to do surveys this summer? So you could name your city, you can name a mountain that you plan to go to. So just take a couple minutes and share. It'll be really fun to see the kind of ground that we're going to be able to cover together.
Amy, I believe oh, there we go.
Oh, there it goes. Oh, yay. That's so exciting to see. They're coming in so fast. I was going to read them as they came in, but they're coming in so fast. I see a lot of Colorado popping in and then some Utah. Awesome. Anywhere in Nevada that you need it. Awesome. We need a lot of Nevada. There's some Wyoming too. Awesome. This is so fantastic. Thank you for sharing. I'm really excited to see the diversity of places because we have a lot of ground to cover. We've got 4 states and these are not small states. So awesome. Thanks so much for sharing. So let's talk about why this work is so important. Why are we asking you to do this? Why are we taking the time? The answers may be pretty obvious. The answer is pollination. Bumblebees are important pollinators. Pollinators are animals that help pollen the male reproductive parts of cells, move to the female parts of the female cells of flowers in order to produce seeds so that plants can reproduce. This is important in all sorts of ecosystems and different landscapes. Plants can sometimes be pollinated by wind or water. Sometimes they can even self-pollinate, but most plants require an animal pollinator to help them to reproduce. And there's a lot of different pollinators that are known in nature. Birds like hummingbirds, mammals like bats, but many of our pollinators, most of our pollinators are insects. Things like butterflies and moths and flies, beetles, wasps, and then, of course, bees. Of all of the pollinators, bees are really efficient pollinators, maybe the most efficient pollinators, because they feed solely on pollen and nectar. They are vegetarians, and they are out there intentionally collecting and transporting pollen. They're not just there at the flower to eat it, they're there to collect it and take it back to the nest to provision for their offspring. So when there's female bees on the flowers, they're moving pollen on purpose to take it back to the nest. Every female bee has some sort of pollen catching hair and pollen carrying structures. For bumblebees and honeybees, that's the corbicula, um, the, the, um, the pollen basket on the hind leg. For mason bees and leaf cutting bees, they have these specialized hairs on the underside of their abdomen. For some digger bees and sunflower bees, they have these fancy hairs on their back legs that they can carry large amounts of pollen. And then there's some tricky little bees that look like wasps because they don't seem to have those pollen carrying hairs. And that's because they can carry their pollen inside their bodies. They swallow the pollen and nectar, carry it in their crop, and then they regurgitate it when they get back to the nest. So because they are intentionally carrying pollen, they have it on their bodies, they're going to leave pieces of it behind on the flowers and help those flowers to reproduce. And this is important for humans because of our food. We would not be without food if we didn't have pollinators, but we would be without some of our favorite foods, like some of the fruits and nuts and seeds that we enjoy. We estimate 1 in 3 bites of food that we eat is courtesy of insect pollination. And then also just thinking about wild plants in nature, 90% of the world's wild plants depend on pollinators to reproduce. So that's pretty significant. And while we often think about um, pollinators as being important for our food and for farms. They do so much more than that in the ecosystem. They really support ecosystems and are considered keystone species, species that are so important that ecosystems would not be the same without them. So providing the seeds and the nuts and the fruits that plants produce when they're pollinated, that feeds small mammals and birds all the way up to grizzly bears. Plants provide habitat, not only food, but habitat. And sometimes the pollinators are food themselves, like that little caterpillar there. We think specifically about bumblebees as pollinators. There are some characteristics that make them really important pollinators. One is that they're generalists. There are other bees that are generalists, but this means that bumblebees will forage on a variety of different plants, and so they can be important pollinators for a lot of different plants. Bumblebees are often some of the earliest bees to come out in the spring and some of the last ones to be seen in the fall, so they can be important for pollinating early and late season plants. They can also fly in cooler temperatures, so higher elevation and higher latitude places often rely on bumblebees for pollination. And then they can do this behavior called buzz pollination that's happening in this little video on the screen, where bumblebees are able to vibrate their flight muscles in order to rattle pollen out of these tubes where the pollen is being held. And without being able to do that, those flowers wouldn't reproduce as well, and sometimes not at all. Not every bee is able to do that, but bumblebees can. So that makes them important for certain, especially important for certain types of crops. But here's the not so great news. About 10 years ago, there was a bumblebee specialist group that was formed by the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, and they did species status assessments of all 46 bumblebee species in North America. And what they determined was that 1/4 of all of our bumblebee species in North America face some risk of extinction. On this graph, the green is like, that's pretty good news. 28 species are of least concern. So those are species that seem to be doing okay, and maybe some of their ranges are even expanding. There were 5 species that didn't have enough data to make a determination, probably just rare species, things that hadn't been collected or seen a lot, but these are the ones that we're concerned about, which is a big portion of our nearly 50 bumblebee species. What that translates to in our 4-state region is we have 7 bumblebee species that fall into one of those categories. They're a little out of order, but the Western bumblebee, the American bumblebee, and Morrison's bumblebee, those 3 are all classified as endangered, or they're classified as vulnerable. We've got the Southern Plains bumblebee and Crotch's bumblebee. This one's known from California and could be in Western Nevada. This one is from the plains and has been seen in eastern Wyoming and eastern Colorado. Those are considered endangered. And the Suckley cuckoo bumblebee and variable cuckoo bumblebee, those are critically endangered. Neither one of these species has been seen and observed in the wild in over 10 years. The threats that are causing these declines are not fully understood, but we know that there are a lot of factors playing into it. One of the big ones is habitat loss and fragmentation. Bumblebees need flowers for food. They need habitat for nests and overwintering sites. And a lot of our human landscapes with cities and roads, suburbs, green lawns, and large agricultural fields just are not conducive to that bumblebee habitat. There are also pathogens that are spread to wild bees from commercial bees, both from honeybee hives and from commercially raised bumblebees. They can spread pathogens to wild bee populations and cause those populations to decline. Our landscape is filled with lots of different chemicals. All sorts of pesticides are sprayed into the landscape. Herbicides, fungicides, and insecticides all can be harmful, cause lethal or sublethal, not quite lethal effects, but they can cause harm to the bees. There's also can be competition from commercial bees. A honeybee hive at the peak of summer can have 50,000 to 80,000 individuals out foraging. And in an area with limited resources available, that honeybee hive can outcompete native bees like bumblebees. So that can also be a threat to these populations. And climate change as well. As temperatures rise, it makes it harder for bumblebees to forage. When there's drought and there's no flowers, then they don't have food. Storms and fires, all of these things are affecting the landscape and are contributing to these declines of our bumblebee species. The good news is that everybody can do something to help. We can all take action to help. Everyone can plant flowers. We can all provide chemical-free habitat that includes not just flowers, but places for nesting and overwintering. Bumblebees and other native pollinators need advocates, people speaking up to say, hey, did you know there's all these different pollinators? Did you know this is something that you can do? So just sharing what you know with friends and neighbors. And then something else that's definitely needed is we need more data. There's a lot that we don't know about bumblebees. There's actually a lot we don't know about bumblebees, and even where they currently can be found. And that's what the Atlas is all about, is getting the data that we need so that we can take prioritized conservation action. So this is a map that just kind of gives us a snapshot of where we are right now. Like I said, we want to know where are our bumblebees and what habitats are they using. In the background of this map, there's the light blue dots, and those are historic bumblebee records from museum specimens and iNaturalist. And you can see that historically, our data come mostly from population centers like, oh, yeah, there's Denver in the Front Range, there's Salt Lake City. You can see where Reno is. So those are the places where there's a lot of people, so there's been a lot of observations of bumblebees. What we want to do is spread that out. We want to survey all of the four-state region and find out what's going on in all of those gaps, places where nobody has looked for bumblebees before or found bumblebees before. The stars and the dots and the black squares are surveys that happened in our first field season to show that our efforts beginning, and I'm looking forward to this season and 2026 and watch those stars and those dots and those boxes really spread out. Our goal is to have at least 2 surveys in every one of those squares on that map to get a much better snapshot of what's going on locally in this region. So to be a Bumble Bee Atlas volunteer, we're asking you to go out and find bumblebees and net them. So there's a couple things that are important for you to know, a little essential background information for you to be successful doing that. One of them is knowing what they eat. To find bumblebees, you need to find flowers because flowers are their food. They are generalist foragers, so they'll feed on a variety of different flowers. Different species might have different preferences. If there's more than one flower available, they might choose one over the other, but in general, they're generalists. They feed on both pollen and nectar for the nutrients that they need to survive, both as adults and as larvae. So if you're looking for bumblebees, first find flowers. The other thing that's important to understand is the life cycle, the annual nest cycle of a bumblebee colony. This helps you to know when to look for them and to understand what you're seeing when you're seeing different kinds of bees out in nature. So bumblebees, unlike honeybees and a lot of other solitary native bees, have an annual nest cycle. It starts and ends all within the year. So in the winter, bumblebee queens are hibernating underground. They're not in a nest, they're not in a colony. It's just an individual queen, a couple inches deep in leaf litter or compost or soil. And they're there just waiting for the temperatures to rise in the spring. When the spring comes, those queens emerge and you'll see them out on flowers, feeding on pollen, drinking that nectar, and then they're going to search for a nesting site, often underground in abandoned rodent burrows or other excavated cavities. Sometimes they will build a nest above ground in bunch grasses or even in human structures like birdhouses. Um, so once they find a nesting site, that queen is doing all of this work by herself. She doesn't have a colony. She doesn't have anybody to help her. So that individual queen starts the beginnings of a nest. She lays and provisions her first eggs. She incubates them like a bird, and she waits for that first generation of her daughter offspring, her workers, to emerge. After that, multiple generations of female workers, all the daughters of that queen, will emerge throughout the summer. At the peak of the summer, at the peak of this nest cycle, there can be 50 to over 100 bumblebees, depending on the conditions and the species. And this is really when we want people to be out surveying. This is the best time to survey. When those colonies are at their peak, where there's the most workers, they're out foraging, provisioning the nest, taking care of the nest. At this point in time, you won't see the queens. The queens stay in the nest. Their only job is laying eggs, and it's those female workers that are smaller than the queen that are out on the landscape. The timing of this is different depending on where you are in your climate. It can depend on conditions, it can depend on the species. Later in the season, later in the summer or early fall, that nest is going to shift production and there's no longer going to be workers produced, but there's going to be new queens and males that come out of that nest. They will leave the nest and they will mate. That you'll see them on flowers feeding on pollen and nectar, and that new queen will store the sperm from mating with those males until the spring, and she will build up her fat reserves, and then she will find a place to hibernate, to overwinter. She will not overwinter or hibernate in the nest. She finds someplace just under the soil, under the compost, under the leaf litter. The original queen at this point will die. All of the workers will die and the males will die, and that colony ends. And in the following spring, the queens that are overwintering start over from scratch. They'll build a brand new nest in a new location, and the whole cycle begins again. What I just described is the typical life cycle of a bumblebee colony, but that is not true of all bumblebees. There is a subgroup of them that have figured out a different life strategy, and they are the cuckoo bumblebees that are social parasites. These species, they don't have workers. They only have females and males. The females will come out of hibernation a little bit later in the spring after other bumblebee species have established their colonies and have established their nests. And she will invade those nests and usurp or kill the host queen, and then trick the workers into rearing her offspring instead of the host offspring. At the end of the season, what comes out of that nest are cuckoo females and cuckoo males that will mate and to reproduce, and the host will not have reproductives that come out of that. There are some characteristics that make cuckoo bumblebees discernible that helps us to identify them. They're pretty big. They have big old heads and strong mandibles, mouth parts. They have an extra thick exoskeleton and strong stingers because they are going to invade those nests to take them over. And something that's a key when we're identifying a female as a cuckoo is that on her back leg, she doesn't have that pollen basket. She doesn't have a shiny concave area because this female is not going to go out and collect pollen. She doesn't need to. She uses the workers of her host colony to do that work for her, so she doesn't have a pollen basket. In our four-state area, there's 4 different species of cuckoo bumblebees that could be possible. The most common one is the indiscriminate cuckoo, and there was several observations of those last year. The fernald cuckoo bumblebee is a little bit more uncommon, but we have found some, and they were observed last year. The suckly cuckoo and the variable cuckoo, those are those 2 that are listed as critically endangered. They're really rare, and like I mentioned before, they haven't been seen or observed in over 10 years. So that's just scratching the surface of a little bit of essential background knowledge for you as you're becoming a volunteer. If you want to learn more about the ecology and conservation of bumblebees, I invite you to join the annual Ecology and Conservation webinar that's happening on Saturday, April 19th. This is a national event, so the entire Bumblebee Atlas team from all of our projects will take part. And it's a deep dive into learning more about these really awesome animals. So I'd encourage you to learn more. All right, the last thing that's kind of essential for you to know if you're going to go out to be a Bumblebee Atlas volunteer is being able to identify an insect as a bumblebee, which seems like it should be easy, but it's not always easy. There's a lot of tricksters out on the landscape, things that look really similar. So it's really important to know what to look for. So bumblebees, if you're thinking about what are their defining characteristics, like all insects, they have 3 body parts: head, thorax, and abdomen, 6 legs, and they have 4 wings. In this picture, it's not super easy to see because those 4 wings and hind wings are connected, but that's one key characteristic that will distinguish them from some other insects. They have relatively long, jointed antennae. They have large compound eyes on the side of their head and then smaller simple eyes or ocelli on what we would maybe call the forehead. The females have this pollen basket, corbicula. So that's a shiny concave area on the back legs surrounded by bristly hairs that they use to pack the pollen and nectar into a ball and carry it in that space. And that's different from most other bee species in our area, except for honeybees have that as well. And then a really key thing to look for is that they're robust. They're kind of chunky and they're hairy. And the colors that you see on a bumblebee are the colors of the hairs on their bodies, not the color of their exoskeletons under the hairs. So that's an important thing to pay attention to as you're working to distinguish them from some of these other tricksters. So one thing that that sometimes is really easy to mistake for a bumblebee are certain flies. There are flies that do a really good job of imitating bumblebees. They're fuzzy, they'll buzz, they'll fly around in flowers, and they can be really easy to be confused for a bumblebee. So here's how you can tell them apart. Bumblebees have 4 wings, and all flies only have 2 wings. So that's one thing that you can look for. Bumblebees, their whole body is usually really hairy, and flies often are not as hairy. You can see that this fly is a little bit smoother, but that's not always true. Like the one I showed you on the previous slide was a pretty hairy fly. The bumblebees have their compound eyes are on the side of their head, where a lot of flies, the eyeballs are just really big and bulbous, and sometimes like this one, it takes up almost the whole head is eyeballs there. And then remember those jointed antennae, they're kind of longer jointed antennae, where on the flies, they have kind of these short, stubby antennae to tell them apart. You'll definitely see honeybees in lots of parts of our 4-state region, and especially when there's workers, bumblebee workers out on the landscape, you can sometimes get them mixed up. So when you're looking at honeybees compared to bumblebees, the honeybees are going to have a more medium-sized torpedo-shaped body. They're going to be more elongated than chunky like the bumblebees. When you're looking at a honeybee, you'll see that they have orange or tan and black stripes on their abdomen, and those colors are on the exoskeleton, not on the hairs. So that's something to look for. They will carry their pollen in the same way on that pollen basket on the hind leg. So if you see a bee carrying a ball of pollen in a pollen basket, that's a bumblebee or a honeybee. And this last one, definitely hard to see when the bee is flying by or on a flower, but if you get a good look, it's kind of a fun fact to know, is honeybees have hairy eyes. One that I've heard a lot of here in Western Colorado, people tell me about the big black bumblebees that they're seeing in their yards. And most of them are not seeing bumblebees, they're seeing carpenter bees. These definitely get mixed up as bumblebees a lot. Some things to look for is the abdomen of carpenter bees is shinier. It's not as densely covered with hairs, so you can see the shine of the exoskeleton more. They do not have the pollen basket on that hind leg. They'll have other pollen carrying hairs instead. And then mostly black. A lot of times they're going to have a lot more black, but that's a kind of a not always because this is also a carpenter bee and that definitely is not all black. And with the yellow hairs on the thorax and the yellow hairs here, it's like, yep, that definitely looks like a bumblebee. But you'll notice that the abdomen on this one is still pretty shiny, so that's the way you can tell them apart. There are also some other solitary native bees out on the landscape that are big and fluffy and look like bumblebees like digger and longhorn bees. And here's what you look for here. This pollen carrying structure is a key. So they don't have a pollen basket. This bee looks like she's wearing really fancy leg warmers because she's got so much pollen packed in those hairs on her back legs. So that's something to distinguish them. And then it's hard to see in this picture, but the faces look really different because these other digger longhorn bees have kind of a face that sticks out, a protuberance on their face, and bumblebees have a little flatter of a face. These can be really tricky, And I don't want this to freak you out and be like, I can't tell them apart. How am I going to know that? It's okay if you don't. It's not you don't need to be able to discern all of that, but you will start to learn. Joining the Bumble Bee Atlas and getting to know the bees in your neighborhood is just a great way to get to know the diversity of bees in your neighborhood. As a volunteer, if you're not sure if what you're looking at is a bumblebee, it's okay if you take a picture and submit it. One of us from Xerces looks at every single picture that is taken and we verify the identification. And there's a button that we can pick that says not a bumblebee. And that's okay. We would rather you take a picture if you're not sure than freak out or not know what to do. So just use this as an opportunity to get to know your insects and learn as you go. We don't have time tonight to get into how to tell all the different species of bumblebees. There are 30 different species that are possible in our four-state region. But if a lot of times volunteers want to start to learn, what species is that? What species is that? So this is a resource, the ID guide that is available on the website. And it's a handy starting point. So it's a quick guide to females. You can compare the color pattern. The back or the second page of this resource kind of walks through what do you look for to try to identify a bumblebee to species. This can be really challenging. It can also be really frustrating. A lot of species look very similar. A lot of species have multiple color forms. And so this is something that takes a lot of practice. And even people that have been identifying bumblebees for years can't always identify every individual species because there's some that are just so tricky. If you want to learn more about Bumblebee ID, these are some great resources that you can look into. You can get the book, The Bumblebees of North America. It's a really in-depth and great resource. And then Bumblebees of the Western and Eastern US are free PDFs that you can find online. Both of these are necessary if you're in Wyoming and Colorado because we do have some Eastern US bees that come into those states. And you'll also need the Western US. In Utah and Nevada, the Western Bumblebee resource is going to be sufficient. There are also some state-specific resources. The Bumblebees of Colorado is a free PDF that's available online. It also has drawings to show the color variations of those different species. The Bumblebees of Wyoming is a booklet that was produced by the Biodiversity Institute at the University of Wyoming. It's available on their website for, I think, $2. And then Utah Pollinator Pursuit is a resource that has pictures and a species list of bees specific to Utah. I don't know of a Nevada specific bumblebee resource yet. If you know of one, please let me know so I can share it. And hopefully that is something that can come out of our work here in the Atlas. There was also last winter, two of our colleagues, Rich, who is the lead of the Bumblebee team, and Leaf, who runs the California Bumblebee Atlas, they did a series of webinars on identifying bumblebees in Western US. They focused on the bees of California and the Pacific Northwest because those are the atlases that they were part of. But most of what they shared would be applicable to the bumblebees in our region. So if you want to watch those webinars, you can go to the Bumblebee Atlas website, go to resources, train online, and then look for either California or Pacific Northwest, and you'll find the links to those two videos, one for females, one for males. Michelle and I are planning this summer to have a webinar about identifying bumblebees in the mountain states. So if it's something that you want to learn, keep an eye out for that coming. I think we said probably in June. All right, that is the what and the why and some important background information. So I'm going to pause for just a minute and see if there's any questions that have come up that we should answer so far.
So Janet Borg has a question about priority grid cells, but I think we're gonna wait because Amy will address that in a little bit.
Yeah. Is that the only question?
It is.
Oh, all right. Well, then we will go on. Awesome. So the rest of our time tonight is the how to join the Mountain States Bumblebee Atlas. This little graphic shows the steps, and we're going to walk through these and help you to understand your role in this process. So the first step is training. We ask volunteers to go out and catch bumblebees, put them in vials, and take pictures of them. We want them to be safe when they're doing this, and we want them to be confident when they're doing this, comfortable doing this. So it is important that volunteers are trained. Also, I mentioned earlier the standardized protocol. We want to make sure that all of our volunteers are following the same guidelines so that we know that the data across the whole project and all of our projects are being collected in the same way. So minimum training requirements is one of these three options: attending a live training webinar or watching a recording, which you are doing tonight. So you're meeting your minimum training tonight. You could also read the participant handbook, that in-depth resource that I mentioned, or you can attend a full day in-person workshop to be trained. A lot of times, because it is so much information, volunteers tend to use all of these or two of these. They tend to get trained in more than one way, use all of these different resources. Beyond those required trainings, there's also a bunch of other resources available to help build confidence for our volunteers. So the one-page cheat sheet that I mentioned at the beginning, there's videos and a lot of content on the website. And throughout the spring and summer, I'll be traveling around and hosting field training events, which is really a chance to get hands-on practice to build confidence in going out to do these surveys. This is what we have in the works for in-person events this summer. You can see I'm going to be busy and all over the place. So field trainings are shorter, hands-on practice, and workshops are full-day trainings. So the details of some of these are still being worked out, but check out your state, see if there's an event near you that you can attend. And if there isn't, and you can think of a place where there would be a great location for a training, reach out. And if I can fit it in, I will definitely try. And if it doesn't work out for this summer, we can try to fit into 2026. On the Bumble Bee Atlas website, at the top menu, there's an events page. So this is the place to go to find out when those events are happening. On this page, this is a screenshot of further down. So when you get to the events page, there's a list of virtual trainings that are happening. And when you scroll down, you'll get to this map. And these dots represent different in-person events that are happening. You can click on those dots and find details about those events. And then there's a link for you to register. So as the final details of all of those events get worked out, more dots are going to get added to this map, and then you'll be able to register for those events. I think the best way to know about events that are coming up, especially if things get added or changed, is to join the e-newsletter mailing list. This will go out weekly during the field season, monthly in the off season, and it's just a really great way to stay up to date on news, events, tips, and highlights. That QR code will take you there, but also on the website, there's a form for you to fill in to show that you're interested and want to join the newsletter. And that's available on the Mountain States page and also on the main Atlas landing page. All right, check. That is the training. So the second step is to create a Bumblebee Watch account. Remember I told you that bumblebeewatch.org is our data site. This is where people go to upload pictures and survey data. So you will need to have a username and password to log into your account. So you'll go to bumblebeewatch.org, and if you haven't already created an account, down at the bottom there's a place for you to register. After that, you'll log in. If you lose your password, here's a lost password place. And then once you're logged in, you can go up to your account and you can see the surveys you've done, your pictures, and all of that. Once you create an account, I encourage you to check out this website. There's a lot of information here. Sightings are where you can go and see pictures and observations that other volunteers have made. You can look at maps and narrow down by species to see where different species are found on a map. And we have volunteers all through the US and into Canada, so it's pretty fun to look at. The field guide will help you see the different color patterns of the different species, and there's even more resources if you click on that drop-down menu. You will need your Bumblebee Watch username for the next step, so that is why this is number 2. You will need your Bumblebee Watch username to adopt a grid cell, which is step 3. So we've divided the 4 states into 371 grid cells. A grid cell is 50 kilometers by 50 kilometers, but you can see around the edges of the states that they kind of get some strange shapes. The goal of this is to try to spread out our survey efforts so we are not all crowded together doing surveys in the same place. The goal of the atlas is to have at least 2 surveys from every one of these grid cells. We ask our volunteers to adopt a grid cell, and when you adopt a grid cell, you're making a commitment to conduct 2 surveys in that grid cell during the survey window this field season. So here's the answer to that question about priority grid cells. So we have designated 75% of the 371 grid cells as high priority for this year. So these are grid cells that are away from population centers. They're the ones that haven't had very many records in the past, or they are places where some of those conservation target species are known to have been relatively recently. So looking for those conservation target species, trying to get data from places that maybe some of these grid cells have 0 bombus records ever. Nobody's found bumblebees there. Nobody's probably looked for bumblebees there. You can adopt and do surveys in any grid cells, even if it's not a high priority grid cell. But these orange cells are the ones that we really are encouraging our volunteers to try to go out and conduct surveys in, to help us meet our goals of filling in the places that haven't historically been surveyed. Because our landscapes are so diverse and we have such different climates across our 4-state region, we've talked with project leaders in the different states and set up 3 different survey windows for 2025. So there's different start dates depending on where you are. So the Southern Nevada and Southwest Utah, the Atlas is going to start April 1st. So they can start looking for bumblebees early, and they will go later after the monsoons, but they're not going to be out looking for bumblebees in July. Great Basin, Colorado Plateau, High Plains, May 1st is the start date going until mid-September. And then higher elevation, higher latitude places will start June 1st and go to the end of August. This map shows those different survey windows with different colors. So the blue here is that April 1st start date. The yellow is the May 1st start date, and the purple is June 1st start date. The darker colors are our high priority grid cells. The lighter colors are our lower priority grid cells. So to adopt a grid cell, I'm actually going to take you here to show you. So you'll go to the website. So go to the home. If you go to the bumblebeeatlas.org, you'll go to get involved and then adopt a grid cell. And when you do that, you'll get to this page where there's information, and you can click down and make sure you've done all of those before you get started. And then you'll go down to this map, and this map shows all of the grid cells for all of our Atlas projects. You can use your mouse, or you can use these plus and minus signs here to zoom in. And when you zoom in, you'll see the colors of those grid cells change to match the colors on the map that I just showed you. Over on the left, there's a legend, so you can click on that, and that will show you what those colors mean. You can change the base map, so you can change what the bottom map looks like if that helps you to see things better. And then you can click on any of those grid cells, and when you click on a grid cell, it will pop up and tell you what is that grid cell number, is it high or low priority, what are the survey dates. And then you can even zoom in further to see the details of that region. If you zoom in far enough, the color goes away so you can see more of the details. So you can use this map to explore where you want to survey. You could also use this search bar to type in a location and to find out what grid cell is that place in. So Buffalo, Wyoming is in Wyoming 20. So you'll explore a little bit, figure out which grid cell you want to adopt, and then you will scroll down, and there's a form where you'll fill in these fields to adopt your grid cell. So first name, last name, zip code. This is where you need your Bumblebee Watch username. You'll give an email address, then you'll choose your state. And when you choose the state, it will populate this with the grid cells that are possible. And then there's a question about how you heard about the Atlas, and then some certification questions. You certify you're over 18 years of age, or you're with a parent. This is a risk liability release form. It's not okay to trespass, and you are a volunteer and are not expecting to get paid. Once you've filled all that in, you'll hit submit, and then you will get a confirmation email. So if you don't get a confirmation email after you complete that form, send me a message because then maybe something's going wrong on our end with that. It is okay for you to adopt more than one grid cell. Some people adopt multiple grid cells, and that's fine. Just make sure that you're doing 2 surveys in each of your grid cell if possible. It's okay for more than one person to adopt a grid cell, so don't worry about like, oh no, they're going to get my grid cell. 50 by 50 kilometers is pretty big, so it's okay to have more than one person in each grid cell doing surveys. And it's also okay to conduct a survey and submit data from a location that's outside of your grid cell. If you're traveling or you are driving through an area and you happen to see a place to do a survey, awesome, do the survey. Don't worry about it, going and adopting that grid cell. The grid cell adoption is helping us to see throughout the season where people are planning on going, and it'll help us as coordinators to figure out where do we need to recruit more volunteers, where do maybe I need to go and do some surveys. All right, so that is adopting a grid cell. The next step then is to plan your survey. It's important to take some time to plan what you're going to do and where you're going to do it. This can often take more time than you might imagine, but thinking about when, where, the permits that you might need, and then making sure you have the supplies that you need. Whoops, let me go back. When to survey is going to be determined a lot by where you are in our 4-state region. Remember, the goal is to capture the diversity of bumblebees at peak season. So trying to get like, where are the wildflowers at peak bloom, trying to catch that middle point. Make sure that you're surveying within your grid cells survey window. Make sure there's flowers in bloom where you're gonna not be able to find bumblebees. And then some weather guidelines. Make sure the temperatures are between 60 and 90 degrees Fahrenheit. Make sure there's little to no wind, so less than 20 miles per hour, and don't try to do surveys in the rain. The where to survey is really up to you. You can survey any place within your 50 by 50 grid cell. You're going to choose a 1 hectare area within your grid cell. That's 2.5 acres. As long as you have permission to be on that land, it's fine for you to do a survey there. It can be natural areas or urban areas. It can be parks, roadsides, any of those places. Just make sure that you are on land that you're allowed to be on. Do not trespass. Some of us are going to encounter this situation. It's so hot, it's so dry. How am I going to find bumblebees there? That is going to be a challenge for a lot of the parts of some of our area. Here are some tips for you. One is to seek out places where there is or was water. Try going to higher elevations. In the hot part of the season, try going out earlier in the morning to beat the heat. A really great resource are local biologists in your BLM field office, in your Forest Service field office, in your state park field office. So talk to those state and federal workers and ask them for suggestions of where you can find flowers and where you could find bumblebees. In these hot, dry areas, sometimes there's more flowers along roadsides. So we'll talk about roadside surveys as an option in a little bit. And if you do end up at a place like this in this picture, a bumblebee could come to those plants, those flowers that are there. So I would say be patient. If you're out in a landscape like that, it's going to be a big deal for you to find a bumblebee, but you might be the first person in your grid cell to document a bumblebee there. So it's worth the wait. Be patient and just move between the flowers that are there. Permits and permission. Some lands do require permits and need special permission to be there. This is going to be a little bit confusing and complicated because we're talking about lands managed by lots of different organizations and agencies, and we're talking about 4 states. So I'm going to give a little summary, but then there's more details in the participant handbook and on the website. Okay, so private land you can definitely survey on as long as you have permission. If it's your land or a friend's land, awesome. If it's somebody that you don't know well, we suggest just making sure your permission is in writing to cover yourself. There's specific guidelines for doing roadside surveys, but that is an option. Just making sure you're being careful of your own safety and making sure you're not trespassing on private land. There is across our region a lot of land that belongs to tribal nations or is managed by the Department of Defense, by the military. And we do not have permission to survey on these lands. So please make sure that you know where those lands are and respect those boundaries. If you adopt a grid cell that has a lot of tribal or DoD land, it will be noted in your confirmation email that there's a lot of DoD land in your grid cell, so be aware of that. When we're talking about public lands, it varies a little bit by agency and by state. The Bureau of Land Management is our partner in this project, so we do not need permits to conduct surveys on BLM land. They do want to know where and when we're doing surveys. This is just so that they know that this work is being done, but also they can let you know if there's a gate closed or if there's a controlled burn or if a road has been washed out. They want to help support the work that you're doing, so they ask that you contact your local field office about where and when you plan to survey on BLM lands. And then there are some lands across the 4 states that are classified as conservation lands. Those are monuments, wilderness study areas, and national conservation areas, NCAs. And those, depending on the state, you might need permits, you might need special permission. And so read for your state. And like I said, this is on the website. This is in the participant handbook so that you can read those details when you know where you want to survey. National parks are each managed independently, and they have different rules and permits for every national park. We have permits for 4 national parks right now, Great Basin, Mesa Verde, Grand Teton, and Yellowstone. You may do surveys there, but you need to have a copy of our permit. So to do that, contact the Mountain States Bumble Bee Atlas, goes to both me and Michelle. So if you email that, we can get you a copy of the permit. And then there's special guidelines that go along with doing surveys in national parks. So we want to make sure that you know and follow those guidelines. We have permission to do surveys on all Forest Service land across our 4 states, including wilderness areas, but you will need to carry what's called a nominal effects letter, which is a letter from the forest supervisor that says the work that's being done is not going to impact the land, and those volunteers have permission to do that. So again, you'll just reach out to me at that Mountain States Bumble Bee Atlas email address to get a copy of that nominal effects letter. They also want you to contact the field office for the same reason as the BLM. They want to know where surveys are being done, and they want to let you know if there's anything that you need to know of in the area where you plan to go. State lands are different by state. And so you really just need to check on the website or in the handbook, because if we get into all the depths of that, it'll take us a long time. And then at county and local level, we ask you to just connect with those local land managers yourself. They're often really supportive of this work. They just want to know more about it and want to know where and when. And if you need some support in having those conversations, please reach out to me, rope me into those conversations. I'm happy to support you. So to find this on the website, if you go to the Bumble Bee Atlas website, at the top menu, there's resources and then there's permits. And when you scroll down on that page, you'll find your state and click on it, and then you'll see a summary of the different land managers and guidance for your state. This can be confusing, so please don't feel bad about emailing if you have any questions about this permitting process. All right, when you're planning your survey, please know that your safety is our first priority, so keep that in mind as you're making your plans. We also encourage you to have a plan and a backup plan and be flexible. You maybe know of a really great place that you were at a couple of years ago, or you find a great place on the map, and then you get there and maybe the road has been washed out or there's been a fire or an area has been logged. So it's really important to be flexible, know that it doesn't always work out. Field work is really fun, but can also be really challenging in those kinds of situations. Make sure to check the weather before you go out so you don't get caught in a storm or a flash flood. And there's a lot of really remote areas across our 4 states, so be ready to navigate without cell service and always make sure someone knows where you're going to be. Before you head out to your surveys, you obviously need some supplies. Really important is your insect net for catching bumblebees. You need data sheets and a writing utensil for recording the information that you gather. You'll need vials to place the bumblebees in, a cooler with crushed ice, a camera, something to take pictures of the bees, a GPS unit or smartphone app so you can mark your exact location. You need your GPS coordinates. Something to time yourself. A clipboard is helpful, and field guides are also helpful so you can identify the plants and you can identify the bumblebees. These last two are optional, they're just helpful to have. When you're thinking about a net, you can look for and search for like what's called a standard net or an aerial insect net. The key thing is that when you're looking at your net, you want to make sure that the main net part is mesh. It's fine mesh that you can see through. There are some insect nets that are canvas, and it's really hard to get a bumblebee out of a net when you can't see through it. So when you're choosing your net, make sure that it's a see-through mesh. And the standard and aerial insect nets, or even it's sometimes called a student net. Those do have that. You'll need small containers to hold bumblebees while they get chilled and immobilized before you take pictures. So these kinds of containers that you see in the picture that we use, a lot of us at the Atlas use, are centrifuge tubes. Either 30 or 50 milliliters are the size. Those work great and you can order them online. Other containers work great. Having jars, plastic containers, prescription bottles, condiment cups, those all work really well, but make sure that they're clean. You don't want the leftovers of your medicine to be in the bottle when you put a live bee in there. So just make sure that the containers that you use are clean. A cooler is used to chill our bumblebees. You're going to be carrying it out to the site and you're walking around, so you want it to be small and portable. You want cubed or crushed ice like you can buy at the grocery store or gas station. And please avoid gel ice packs or like those blue ice because those actually get too cold and can be too cold for the bees and kill them. You're going to, a really key part of the atlas is taking good pictures of the bumblebees that you find. So some sort of a camera is required. Having something with a macro setting is the best and takes really great pictures, but cell phone cameras work and some cell phone cameras have really great cameras. My cell phone, my smartphone is pretty old and does not take great pictures. If you are in that boat, then I would suggest maybe looking into getting one of these smartphone attachments. It clips on right to your smartphone and then it can help you take macro pictures, take better pictures with your cell phone camera. Like I said, something to time yourself and something to know where you are. So a cell phone timer or a watch, and then a GPS unit or a mapping app on your phone so that you can show exactly what your coordinates are, what your latitude and longitude of your survey site is. Data sheets are important. You need a data sheet for every survey that you do. The data sheets are 2 pages. Sometimes they're printed front and back. This is updated from 2025. So if you did surveys last year in 2024, you'll notice a couple things are different, but last year's data sheets will still work just fine. There's just a couple updates that have been made. These are available on the website. You'll need to print them off before you go to the field. A public library is a great resource for printing if you don't have a printer at your house. There is also a supplemental data sheet available on the website. This is a place where there's extra room if you find a really good spot with a lot of bumblebees. The first data sheet has 15 lines for recording the bumblebees that you find, so you have room to have 15 bees. But this extra supplemental data sheet gives you more lines if you collect more than 15. And then the second page of the supplemental data sheet has this grid with the squares that some people like to use as a background when taking pictures to give it a sense of scale. A clipboard is really helpful to have when you're out in the field. And I even use a binder clip on the bottom of the clipboard, especially when it's windy, to help hold that paper in place. If you want some guidance of helping, where do I go to buy a net? Go to the Bumble Bee Atlas website, go to resources and equipment, and then all of the information with some suggestions of links and places to go. So there's information there to help you. This is also in the participant handbook. All right, so that's what it takes to plan your survey. We're moving right along. The next step is the most fun part. This is what we're doing this for. This is the part that gets really addictive, is going out and conducting your surveys. Remember, you're committing to conduct 2 surveys in your grid cell during the field season when you adopt your grid cell. Every survey has two parts. You're catching and photographing the bumblebees that are there so we know which species are there. And then you're conducting a habitat assessment by filling out all the parts of the data sheet. And that is telling us what habitat they're using. And then you're recording the flowers that each bumblebee was on so we know what flowers they're using and also what flowers are in bloom. So the steps that we're going through, the guidance, this is our standardized protocol. This is what we want everybody to follow so we know that people are conducting surveys in the same way. So when you get to the place where you're going to do your survey, you want to estimate 1 hectare. So 2.5 acres, 100 meters by 100 meters. You don't have to measure it, but kind of scope it out and estimate and figure out where is that hectare. And then you want to figure out the location of the center. So stand in the middle of your survey area and use your map to mark your coordinates at the center of your survey site. Then within that 1 hectare in your survey area, you're going to search and catch bumblebees for 45 person minutes of active searching time. So person minutes means it's 45 minutes total divided by the number of people that are there. So when I'm out surveying by myself, I set my timer for 45 minutes and I'm looking for bumblebees, actively searching for bumblebees for 45 minutes. If I go with 2 friends and there's 3 of us searching, we each set our timers for 15 minutes and are actively searching for 15 minutes. Make sure that when you're surveying, even if there's a really good patch of flowers in one place, walk through the entire survey area and pay attention to all of the flowers, not the most showy ones, because different species could be on different flowers. You want to capture every bumblebee you see, or attempt to capture every bumblebee you see. So don't skip any. Like that's what we want to know is how many bumblebees are you able to capture in 45 minutes. And for every bumblebee that you capture, you want to record what flower was it on. And the 45 minutes is active searching time. So when you get a bee into your net, you're going to pause your timer, and then you can take your time getting the bee into a vial, putting that vial in the cooler on ice to chill it down. Get a drink of water, have a snack, and then restart your timer when you're ready to go back and keep looking. So the 45 minutes is that active searching time. All right, this is the part where sometimes people are like, I'm not sure if I can get a bee into a net. So I'm going to play this video. This is one of our partners in Idaho who did a video to show us how to get a bee from a flower onto a net. I'm going to play it, and Michelle, will you let me know if something's not right with the sound? Good now?
When you're out collecting your bumblebees, you want to
Yep.
make sure you're doing it carefully, but you also want to make sure you're doing it with a technique where you're actually going to be successful in capturing the bumblebee. Now, the best way to do it is to come from the side. You'll actually sweep over the tops of the flowers, but the most important part is to make sure you follow through and have the net droop over the side of the rim, and you can actually flip it over a 3rd time so the bee can't escape. And another way, you can come from below the bee if the flower's kind of drooping, and you can come up. But again, you have to have that follow through where you flip the net over the top. Another way, if you're feeling a little more timid about sweeping really hard, is bees tend to fly up when they try to escape. So you can actually put the net over the top of the flowers that it's on, and the bee will usually fly up to the top of the net, or once it gets about halfway, you can just tip the net over and then it'll be captured in the bottom of your net.
Okay, this is something that definitely takes practice. It will be slow the first time, and you will miss bumblebees when you first start, and that's okay. And so just know that this is something that definitely takes practice. Now you've got a bee in your net, and you need to get it into a vial to put it on ice in the cooler. So this is another short video where Ross, the same person, is going to just show us how to make that transfer.
So once you've collected your bee, you're going to gather the net up so that the bee is restricted to one part of the net. And then you're going to take your vial with the lid off, slide it up the net to that area where you've kind of narrowed or bottlenecked the net. You'll slide the bee into the vial and keep that net nice and tight over the top of the vial. Once he's in there, you can take your lid, you can slide it up the net to get to where the top of the vial is, and then you can sometimes keep the net inside the opening and then slide the net out once your lid's on top. Or you can just, if he's cooperating or she's cooperating, you can just slide the lid right over the top, and then you've got your bumblebee. Once you've collected it, you can put it in your cooler or put it on ice, or so you can prepare to process that bee once you're done with your survey. Once you've collected your bee, another thing that's helpful to do post-processing is to collect a flower that you collected the bee on, and you can pop the flower into the vial with the bee you collected on that plant, so when you're processing the bee later, you remember what flower it was collected on.
So it is important, remember one of our questions is what flowers are the bees using? It is important to pay attention to the flower. You can use the strategy that he showed where you put a piece of the flower in the vial. Other times people number their vials and will record on the data sheet what number each plant, the plant goes with. Some people write directly on the vials. So find a strategy that works for you, but make sure you're documenting which flower each bee was captured off of. It does seem a little strange that we're putting bees in vials and then putting them in a cooler on ice. This is a protocol that has been used for years with thousands of bees and is safe. This is a way that we can learn about bumblebees without having to kill them and put them on pins and kill them. The ice chills them and immobilizes them. It does not cause harm. So it's especially when you get them in ice right away. So you want to make sure that you put them right away. They're going to get more stressed if they're flying around in a vial and it's hot. So this just knocks them out and it does not cause harm. They should be chilled for at least 15 minutes. You want to make sure that they're immobilized before they come out. If they're still wiggling around, put them back on ice. They're going to look like they're dead when they come out. And that's what you want for being able to get up close and personal and take pictures. Please do not leave them on ice longer for 90 minutes. Then they could get stressed or they could freeze to death. It's important that you keep the caps above the ice line so that if the liquid starts to melt and the vial isn't watertight, we don't get water into the vials and drown the bees. It's best, like I mentioned, crushed cubed ice. Don't use those blue ice packs because that gets too cold. The temperature of that crushed cubed ice is perfect for what we need to do. Once you finish the 45 minutes of your survey and you've got bees in vials in the cooler on ice, you need to give them some time to cool off. And this is a great time to complete the data sheet and habitat assessment. So there is example of a completed data sheet on the website and in the participant handbook. We're also going to be working on some short videos that kind of walk through the steps because sometimes people have questions about it. But you're going to be recording information about your location, the surveyors, the type of survey, and weather. You're going to be looking around that area and using the guidance here to classify the habitat type. You're going to be looking for evidence of materials available for nesting and overwintering. You're looking for evidence of different land management practices. You're counting the species of flowers and making a list of the 15 most common species of flowers that are in bloom in your survey area. You don't need to keep the flowers, you just need to record them. And we want you to record the scientific name to the best of your ability. I am not very good at knowing plants. This is something that I'm still learning it's just something I've always struggled with. I rely pretty heavy on field guides and apps like iNaturalist to help me to identify the different species of plants. We want you to try to get them to scientific genus if you can, but if not, writing a detailed description with a common name works. But you can also take pictures of a plant, and then there's There's people at extension offices, the Native Plant Society, all of these master gardeners. People probably know those flowers and can help you to identify them. Then there is a place for you to record bumblebee information as you take pictures of your bumblebees that you've captured. You'll use one line for each bee. And then at the end of your survey, there's a place for you to record your time and your mileage so we can get a sense of how many volunteer hours are used to gather the data that we need. When you're going through, this is zoomed in on that bumblebee section of the data sheet. It's going to ask you to record for each bumblebee. What's its sex? What is its species? What's the host plant? And then connect it to the photos on your camera or your cell phone. It's okay if you don't know if it's a male or a female or a worker or a queen. You can say, I don't know, or put a question mark here. And when you upload data, you don't have to add that. You can just leave it undetermined, and we will figure that out when we look at your pictures. The same thing for bumblebee species. If you don't need to be able to learn bumblebees to species, if you want to try to learn them and you want to write down your best guess, that's awesome. If you don't know, when you enter data, you'll use bombispa. So that's a way of saying this is some species of bumblebee, and I don't know what it is. And like I said, one of us looks at every picture that you submit, and so we will be able to determine it to species as long as we have good pictures to be able to do that. It is important for you to record host plant to the best of your ability, and sometimes you're going to catch bumblebees, as they're flying near the ground or they're resting. So if it's not on a plant, it's okay to record that as well. Bees is probably the most important part of this. We are using photographs to identify bees where in the past we've looked at them under microscopes to identify them to species. So we're relying on you, our volunteers, to take really good pictures, which is why we put the bees on ice to knock them out so you can get really close, so you have time to get good pictures before they warm up and fly away. So it is essential that you take high quality photos. We need them to be in focused, zoomed in or cropped as best they can, and not in shadows. We need to be able to see the details of the colors on the hairs of their bodies. Some guidelines is thinking about when you're looking at your pictures, can you see individual hairs? And do the colors in your pictures match the colors of the bees in real life? And if the answer is no, then retake those pictures, try again. It's a good idea to practice first. This is a good thing to do when we're waiting for bumblebee season to start, is use your camera or your macro lens or your cell phone and practice taking pictures of tiny things up close. And so it's really important so that you can get used to how to focus in this macro photography. Make sure that the bees aren't moving around when you're doing this. It's okay to put them back in the vial on ice if they wake up too fast or they weren't knocked out yet. It helps to have a light colored background. Like I said, pay attention to shadows and also block the wind. Bumblebees are pretty light. When they're immobilized and laying on paper on your clipboard, if a gust of wind comes through, there are instances where the bees get blown away by the wind. So block that wind and be ready to protect them from the wind. You will be able to upload 5 pictures for every bee that you collect. It's a good idea to take more than 5 pictures, and then you can sort through your pictures and choose the best 5. And the pictures that we need pictures of the bee from all different angles that correspond to what we look for when we're identifying a bumblebee to species. So if I have a bumblebee and I'm trying to figure out what species it is, one thing that I need to see is the hind leg. We're looking for a pollen basket there. That's going to help us know if it's male or female or one of those cuckoo species. We need to look at the head. So we're going to need to see the color patterns of the hair on the top of the head and some other characteristics of the top of the head. You need to see the front of its face where the antennae are connected to the face, and then also the length of its cheek. So underneath the compound eyes, seeing the length of its cheek. So we need a pretty good picture of the face of the bee. For the thorax, we need to see the pattern of the hairs on the top of the thorax, so between the wings, in front of and behind the wing bases, and also the color of the hairs on the side of the thorax. For the abdomen, we need to see the color patterns of all of the segments. On female bees, there's 6 segments, on males, there's 7. And we need to see that those segments from the top and the sides, because sometimes the color patterns are different, and that helps us to tell them apart. If you're in Western Nevada, there are some West Coast bumblebees that look really, really similar, and we need to see underneath the abdomen to be able to tell them apart. So if you're in Western Nevada and you have a bumblebee that has yellow hairs on the face, and it's very black with just a single yellow stripe on the abdomen, make sure you flip that bumblebee over and get a picture of its belly as well. Often one picture can show a lot of these characteristics. So this picture right here, I can see the hind leg. There's the pollen basket, so of this female bee. I can see the side of the thorax, the side of the abdomen. I can see the top of the head and a little bit on the face, and I can see the cheek length here. So I can see a lot of those characteristics from this one photo. Here, this one, I can see the top of the thorax, the color patterns in front of, between, and behind the wings, and the colors of those segments of the abdomen. And this is a great picture of the face. I can see the color of the hair on top of the head, the color of the hair at the base of the antennae, and the length of the cheek. So you can capture a lot of these characteristics in lots of characteristics in just one photo. Here are some tips. And again, just like all the rest of this, taking really good pictures takes practice. So your pictures won't be fantastic when you first start, and you'll improve the more that you do it. But make sure your pictures are in focus. That's pretty key for identifying them. Check the lighting. It is okay if you get home and you have a dark picture like this, you can use a photo editor to try to brighten it up. Just making sure that you don't lose the colors that are there. We need to see the colors. A lot of times when bees are cold, they're curled up. And so this bee, you can see that she's face planted, and you can't really see the details of her cheek. You can't see her face really well. So if you flip her over onto her back, you can get a really good picture of the face to help you see those characteristics that we need to see. It's really hard to identify wet bees. Their hairs get all matted, and it's really hard to tell what they are. Also, they can drown in this situation. So this has happened. If bees get wet, you can dry them off and put them someplace to warm up, and they'll be okay. But if they get totally soaked, they could drown. So that's why it's really important to make sure that you don't use any cracked vials. Make sure that they're sealed and keep those caps above the ice line. And it is okay to very gently pull the wings open so that you can get a picture of the middle of those abdominal segments. A lot of times when the bees are chilled, their wings are covering that, but we really need to see this. So it doesn't harm the bee. You can pull those wings apart, and it's okay if your fingers are in the picture. We're focusing on the bee, not on how clean your fingernails are. This is the backside of the ID guide that I told you about earlier. This is walking the steps on how to identify a bumblebee. You can use this to know what you need to take pictures of. Make sure that there's a picture of all of the characters that we look for to identify a bumblebee. Also on that one-page cheat sheet, there's a checklist here to show you what we need a picture of. It's really essential that we have a series of pictures for each bee. There are tips and more pictures on the website, reminders, so that when you're ready to go out and do your first survey, you can review this before you go. So go to the Atlas website, go to resources down to photography tips, and then there's a lot of information that's there to help you. Once you finish taking pictures of the bees, it's going to take them a couple minutes to warm up and fly away. So you just want to find a safe place for them to be while they warm up until they fly away. A lot of times people just keep them on their clipboards and just, move on to the next bee while the previous ones are warming up. And what you're going to notice as they do that is you're going to see that that they sometimes look like they're panting, and they start grooming and wiggling around, and that's all perfectly normal. So this is a short video. There's no sound to it, but it'll just help you be ready for what to expect as the bees are warming up and getting ready to fly away. So you can see they do a little wiggling, a little grooming, a little panting, and pretty soon they'll be gone. It only takes them a couple minutes to fly away. Please make sure still that you're thinking about your own safety. Female bees can sting. Males do not have the ability to sting, but any female bee can. So these bumblebee females that you're capturing and taking pictures of can sting you. Stings occur when the bee feels threatened. However, if you're careful and follow the protocol, the stings are rare. Usually it's when I've had multiple bees in my net or I'm messing around with them that I end up getting stung. So just be really careful and respectful of them when you are handling them, and then you can safely handle them while they're immobilized, and then it's a good idea to set them down while they finish warming up before they fly away. If you know that you are allergic, please just be very careful. Take the precautions that you need to take to make sure that you are safe when you're doing this work. We also want to make sure that the bees are okay. We don't want to harm the bees that we're trying to help. So it's really important that once you capture a bee and put it in a vial, you put it in the cooler right away. Don't keep them in ambient temperature. You don't want to keep bumblebees in your pocket until the end of the 45 minutes. That will stress them out and cause them harm. When you're putting the caps on your vials, watch out for heads and toes. There have been some accidental decapitation, so just be really careful when you're putting that cover on. Like I've mentioned, make sure the tops stay above the ice. Let them warm up in a safe, shady spot. You don't want to put them in direct sunlight. Let them warm up at ambient temperature in the shade, and don't leave them on ice for more than 90 minutes. Another important thing is we don't want to contribute to pathogen spread. So in between survey locations, it's important for you to sanitize your equipment, especially your vials. So you can do this with isopropyl alcohol, a dilute bleach solution, or warm soapy water. I typically just put dilute bleach solution into a sink or even bathtub when I have a lot of vials. Kind of swish them around, let them soak, rinse them really well, and let them air dry. Make sure they're perfectly dry before you use them for another survey. All right, so what we just went through is the protocol for a point survey, which is the method that we typically want you to use. Sometimes though, you might want to or need to do a roadside survey, so this is an alternative method. So this is what you'll do along a road instead of finding a 1 hectare place. You might do a roadside survey if there isn't public land available, if you're in an area with a lot of private land. Like we mentioned, if it's really dry and the only place that there's flowers is along roadside. Or sometimes people choose to do a roadside survey on the way to another survey site, so you can take care of both of your surveys in the same day. When you do a roadside survey, you're going to choose a 10-mile stretch of road, and you're going to find 5 stops along that 10-mile stretch, making sure there's at least 1 mile in between each of those stops. And you're going to do a mini survey at each of those stops, and you'll have 15 minutes of searching and capturing bumblebees instead of 45. So 15 person minutes here, 15 person minutes here. So 5 15-minute surveys. At each of those stops along the way, you're going to fill out a data sheet and habitat assessment and take pictures of your bees and release them before you move on to the next one. So you're really doing the survey protocol 5 times in just a shorter chunk of time. If you choose to do a roadside survey, please be aware of your safety. Don't do this on the busy roads. Really pay attention to what traffic is doing. It's a good idea to wear bright colors or a safety vest, and really be aware of property lines and no trespassing signs. And if someone asks you to leave, you don't need to argue, it's okay, just say okay. And even if your survey is not finished, just go ahead and leave and find a different place to do your survey. There will be times when you go out and follow the protocol and there's flowers that are there and you don't see any bees. That can be disappointing, but that's still really valuable data for us. We call those null surveys, when you follow the protocol, 45 minutes of looking and you don't see any bees. If that happens, please still complete the data sheet and submit that data because that is important. So we still want to know what is the habitat, what flowers were there, and then you just won't have any pictures of bees to submit with that survey. Finally, it's possible for you to upload information as incidental observations. So if you're in your backyard or in a park or on a hike and you see a bumblebee, but you don't have time or space or equipment to do a full survey, you can take a picture of a bumblebee in any situation and submit it as an incidental observation. Still try to do your best to take good pictures, as many as you can of that individual bee. Try to record your host plant as well, and you'll upload that to Bumblebee Watch as well. All right, that is information about how to do the surveys. So you finished your survey, and then you need to organize and upload your data. You're going to end up, when you do these surveys, with camera rolls full of pictures of bumblebees. Make sure that you have a method that works for you. So finding some way to mark which bee goes with which flower, which pictures go with which bee, which bees go with which survey. So there's lots of different methods that people use. Find a method that works for you. Feel free to edit pictures as you're organizing them before you upload them to make sure that they're zoomed in and you're trying to make them as easy to tell as possible, and choose your best 5 pictures. If you have extra pictures, please hang on to them. There have been situations where we look at the 5 pictures and it's a tricky species, and we might email you and say, hey, do you have more pictures of this individual from this site at this day? And it's really helpful if somebody has extra pictures to share. To upload your data, you'll log into bumblebeewatch.org, use your username and password to log in, and then you'll click on this button that says Add Sightings. When you do that, there's going to be 2 options. There's Bumblebee Watch and Bumblebee Atlas. Bumblebee Watch, you'll hit this Submit Sightings button if it's an incidental observation. And for Bumblebee Atlas, you'll hit this Submit Sightings button for your survey data, even when you didn't have any bumblebees, so even if you have a null survey. There is this regional projects section at the bottom. Just pretend like that's not there. Use Bumblebee Watch and Bumblebee Atlas. Once you click on that Submit Sighting under Bumblebee Atlas, you're going to get this form come up on your screen, and this online form matches your data sheet. So you'll go through all of these questions, fill in the information that you wrote on your data sheet. Notice that there's an asterisk next to some of these fields. You won't be able to submit the survey without having something in each of those fields, so make sure that it's complete. When you're ready to upload data, if you need some help with that, you can go to the website, go to data and how to submit data, and there's a step-by-step guide on how to do that. There's also step-by-step instructions in the participant handbook with screenshots from Bumblebee Watch to help you. And if you scroll down to the bottom of this page, there's also a video that shows how to upload data to Bumblebee Watch. Right, once you have uploaded data, you're finished. You can go and find another place to do a survey and start that whole process again. But please don't forget to share and celebrate the contribution and the work and your effort. Like I said, we can't do this work without you. It's really valuable, and we love seeing your pictures and we love hearing your stories. So you can follow the Bumblebee Atlas team. This is our national team that manages these social media accounts. But you can go to Facebook and search for the Mountain States Bumblebee Atlas private group. And these are people just from our region, which is a way that you can see regional events, you can connect with people in your area. So I would encourage you to do that if you are a Facebook user, to share and celebrate your contribution. Thinking about moving forward and what comes next, there are a bunch of other resources on the website. There are videos of people doing surveys if you want to see what does that look like. So you could check out underneath Train Online. You can see some of those other videos and just really explore all of the resources that are available. So that's my suggestion as we're waiting for the survey windows to open and we're ready for Bumblebee season to start. Spend the time getting to know the website, reviewing the handbook, watching those videos. If you haven't already, join that e-newsletter mailing list so that you know when registration opens for different events. You can go ahead and adopt your grid cells right now. People are adopting their grid cells and it's fun to see those fill in. Now's the time to figure out your supplies, purchase and gather those supplies. Let me know if you have questions on any of that. Thinking about when and where you might be able to attend an in-person training event. Start planning where you want to survey. Maybe plan a little Bumblebee road trip to go to one of those remote grid cells. And please feel free to email me with any questions that you might have. And then also if you need permits or letters of authorization or the nominal effects letters. That is my job, is to answer your questions to make sure you have what you need. So please reach out to me. And then once we get going, it's going to be really fun, and I hope that you have a lot of fun and spread the word, recruit more people to help. It's more fun to go out and do surveys when you have somebody to go with you. We have lots of supporters at Xerces for this project and all of our projects, so thank you to all of our supporters. And with that, we are finished with what I have for you. We'll take some time to see if there's questions that need to be answered.
Yeah, there's a few things in the Q&A. Is there a good way to get students involved? I would love to do an event to have high school students experience this, but I'm not sure the best way to train students outside of going over the handbook with them.
Yeah, I think with students, I've spent my career as a teacher. Going over the handbook with them will be a little bit rough and they tend to zone out. So doing like a hands-on thing with students, I think would be best is basically doing a field training event with them. I think that, you're going to need to go over the protocol with them. But there was a group in like the Boulder area last summer. I think it was middle school students that they did a writing workshop and they were out there with adults that were teaching them the protocol. They were taking pictures of bees and they were way into it. And there are some teachers in the areas that have reached out and are wanting to incorporate this into curriculum. So I do think that it would be awesome to get students involved. If you have ideas or need some ideas, want to brainstorm some things, or need resources, let me know, because I'm happy to share resources with you, even slides if you want to use like some of these slides to share with students. Please reach out to me and let me know.
All right. Someone wants to know how many bees go in a vial.
Typically one per vial, because then you'll put it in there and you don't want to let one escape while you're putting another one in. So don't try to put more than one in a vial. I will admit that I have sometimes put more than one in a vial when I've caught so many bees in a really good like mountain meadow and I ran out of vials. But it's best to just put one bee per vial. So we recommend that you have at least 20 vials for a typical survey. In some places, you might only catch one or two or three bees. In other places, you might need more than 20 vials, but 20 is a good suggestion of how many to carry so that you have just one per vial.
Okay. Last year I had it start to rain unexpectedly during a survey. I managed and the bees were okay, but any advice, Amy?
Yes, I had a situation like that as well, especially, there can be these quick showers that come through. So pause your time. Like what I did is I paused my timer. I took my cooler of bees and hung out in the car, waited for the storm to pass. If it was going to be raining for the rest of the afternoon, I probably would have given up, like let the bees warm up and release them or tried to process them. I would have processed them, recorded the end time, and have it be less than 45 minutes to just note that and make sure that you mark that time. So I guess I'm answering two different ways right now. If the rain's not going to stop, just end the survey, note how long you were surveying, process your bees as best as you can in the car, and find some place safe to put them to warm up, maybe underneath a plant where they can be sheltered. If the rain comes through and then will stop, give it a little bit of time to dry. So I waited 10 or 15 minutes after the rain came through, and then I went out and finished my survey. So it'll kind of depend on the conditions. But that will happen in some of these places.
This is a great comment. Mimi says, I did most of my surveys alone. It is less challenging and more fun when someone else is along. And just to plug what Amy said earlier, the Facebook group is a great way to connect with other Atlas participants. And if you are looking for a buddy, you can put that request out there.
Yeah, for sure. There's other people that I know in different areas that are looking for buddies too. So you can also let me know, and I can try to do a little bit of matchmaking. And when we get to have a lot of volunteers and we're really busy, I won't have time for that. So the Facebook group is a really great way to start. It is definitely more fun to do this with friends. So recruit your friends and neighbors to go with you as well. Thanks.
Is any ventilation needed for the vial, or would that be potentially problematic for a bee to get wet?
Yeah, we don't want the bees to get wet. They will be fine in that small vial for the amount of time that they're chilled, because they slow their metabolism down. So that's why it's important to get them on ice right away, because then they'll be okay. So you definitely don't want them to get wet.
Is there a better time of day to survey?
That's a good question. So a little bit with conditions like knowing your temperature and your weather is going to maybe guide that. So when it is earlier in the season, you might want to wait till later in the day because remember you want that 60 to 90 degree temperature window. In the hottest part of the summer, you might want to go earlier in the morning. If you had to choose, it's kind of like the middle of the day window if the temperatures are okay. Um, and and then I've heard too that some bee researchers saying that the nectar can get used up earlier in the day if there's a lot of bees on the landscape. So you might have better luck earlier in the day, but later. But there's so much depends on temperature and conditions. So just kind of watch for that temperature and wind and just when you can get out there. Sometimes it takes a drive to get to where you're going. Thanks.
Those are all the questions in the Q&A, but if anyone else has any burning questions, feel free to type them in there.
If you think of questions later, please feel free to reach out. That's what I am here for, and I love to hear from you. Thank you so much for your time and attention this evening. I know it's a lot of information. Take some time to process it, and then I can't wait to see all that we can accomplish together this season. Thank you so much. Have a fantastic evening.